Ahead and get started. Good afternoon. My name is James Reddish with the Little Rock Regional Chamber of Commerce. We are so happy that you all are able to join us this afternoon for this Equip series. For those of you who haven't been to an Equip series yet, this was a program that we started about a year and a half ago now to really connect member expertise to member need. And so we did a survey of our members to try to really understand what members were looking for, particularly our small business and nonprofit community. So we've done things on social media, we've done things on finance and tax, HR, but obviously with all that's going on and the pain that we know that many of our nonprofits are facing right now, we wanted to do a special Equip today on response to COVID-19, responding and hopefully surviving and thriving through this. Because we know that as a fellow nonprofit leader, talking to you as a peer, nonprofits are just a little bit different than many of the other small businesses and certainly some of the major for-profits. And so, you know, much of the assistance is available, but it's a different approach. Plus, we know that our business model is slightly different than some of the for-profits. And so we really want to make sure that for you all who are working as nonprofit leaders, that we're giving you a little bit of insight from one of your fellow chamber members, Justin Buck, who's been at many nonprofits, on how best to handle the situation, how best to think about things, not only the assistance that's available. We're going to answer some of your questions about the payroll protection program and some of the loan programs that are available, but also sort of just general operations and how do you want to be thinking about fundraising and programmatic engagement, and how do you utilize different types of technology to ensure that you're still delivering your mission while maintaining fiscally sound as a nonprofit. And so that's really the context for today. As I said, what we do with these Equip series is we like to look for a member who has an expertise in this area, and they're delivering some of that expertise for free to you all in this format. And then we're recording this, so you'll have access to this afterwards. But these events are not possible without the support of some of our sponsors, and my good friend Stephen Compton with Arkansas BlueCross BlueShield has been a great partner in this Equip series. So I'm going to ask Stephen to give us a little bit of a welcome here from his standpoint at Arkansas BlueCross BlueShield, and then I'll come back on and introduce Justin, who will take us through the remainder of our program. So Stephen, you're up.
Hey James, can you hear me? Can you hear me there, James? All right, good deal. Hey, thank you very much. Special thank you to you and Callie setting this up. Very timely, very much needed. Obviously a challenging situation. Wanted to spend just a few minutes and not only say thank you, but update everybody listening on what we at Blue Cross are doing, and then probably what your insurers are doing if you're not using Blue Cross, because it's a very challenging time for all of us indeed. Key thing first and foremost is that we as insurance carriers have really opened the doors for telemedicine, and we want to stress that you use telemedicine in this time. Even if you do have early symptomatic COVID-19 symptoms, telemedicine is your gateway. At Blue Cross, we waived all co-pays for that. I believe all the other carriers have done that. If you're with a carrier or you don't have insurance, you have access through virtual medicine through the UAMS virtual health center that was just opened months ago. So that was a good timely opening for that. So virtual health is step one. Step two is to understand that we've relaxed a lot of the rules when it comes to maintaining your group health insurance. So if we're going to make an error in this environment, we're going to err on the benefit of our members and the people that we insure. So as you guys, as business owners, nonprofit leaders, are looking at your employees and trying to figure out what to do from an employee standpoint, understand that us at Blue Cross and many of the other insurance carriers have really relaxed a lot of those rules when it comes to number of hours to be a full-time employee, what happens around furloughs, what happens around layoffs. There's rules that engage in that health plan. So just understand that we are opening the doors and becoming much more flexible given this particular time, very challenging time. We've had a lot of questions that centered around the requirements on the PPP loans. And we're going to talk about that here shortly, very timely. We at Blue Cross have been getting absolutely blown up with calls regarding the PP loan because outside of salary, usually your health insurance benefits are your second tier item from a cost standpoint. So look forward to hearing that discussion. Please understand that we at Blue Cross are trying to respond to those requests as appropriately and as timely as possible, given that the conditions on the field are still pretty fluid. As we're working, I would encourage, and I know Callie and James, y'all will share my contact information. If anybody following this call has questions regarding their health plan, how it's going to operate in the near future, what we can do to maintain that coverage, please reach out. If if you're not using Blue Cross, I encourage you to touch base with your carrier. If you can't get a hold of them, I'm happy to answer questions as best as I possibly can. Yet again, we just want everybody to understand that from an Arkansas Blue Cross standpoint, we're going to do everything that we can do to keep coverage in place and keep everybody to where they have that availability to go see the doctor should they need that during this time. So thank you again, James. Thank you again, Callie. This is big. Our nonprofits are a huge part of our business, and the fact that you guys took this initiative, it's very dear to our hearts, and our senior leadership really appreciates you guys stepping in and providing this information.
Thank you, Stephen. We appreciate you as well. And as he mentioned, we will follow back up when you registered today for this webinar. We captured contact information. So you're going to get a follow-up email that will have the link to where this is recorded. I believe we're also streaming this on Facebook Live. And we will include in that email everyone's contact information so that you have it coming out of today's webinar. So with that, let's jump right in. Some of you may know Justin Buck. He's a community connector and coalition builder who strives to make an impact by expanding nonprofits' capacity to pursue their mission more efficiently and effectively. He's worked for over a decade recruiting and developing volunteers, running impactful programming, powering nonprofit missions through fundraising and development, and leading teams of board members, community partners, volunteers, and staff to envision and create better communities for everyone. Justin has raised millions of dollars through conventional fundraising and focused collaboration to build and run programs with local, state, and national impact. He was most recently Community Engagement Director at Harmony Health Clinic, and prior to that served as Development Director at Habitat for Humanity of Central Arkansas. You may know him. His fingerprints are all over the World Cheese Dip Championships. I know that's one near and dear to Justin's heart. And in his new capacity here with Buck Consulting, he works with organizations of all sizes at every stage of their development, from kickstarting new nonprofits to realigning large programming and funding strategies. For missional effectiveness, he knows how to help nonprofits because he has been in that chair himself. Justin focuses on building capacity through strategic planning and strategic alignment, developing, planning, and executing effective and staff coaching, training workshops, presentations, vision casting, custom nonprofit and community solutions. Justin's your guy if you've got any question about how to run an effective nonprofit. So we are incredibly excited to have him join us. He's assembled a group of other experts who he'll introduce, who hopefully can answer all your questions. There are a number of resources that are available to you all as nonprofits that are available to general business, but are also uniquely available to nonprofits. And then in particular, I know Justin's been thinking a lot about how to help nonprofits from a mission standpoint think about this current disruption in how we've been doing business historically, so that we're prepared as we all come back to continue to have strong financial backbones to these organizations, but then also incredible impact from a mission standpoint. So Justin, I'm going to turn it over to you, and he'll lead us through the remainder of the program.
Thank you very much, James. Like James said, I've been working through some of these issues with nonprofits. I've been fielding lots of questions and have been doing my own research as well. So, you know, we noticed that a lot of the information in this federal aid package has been pointed at small businesses, and that is certainly something that I'm grateful for. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so I'm grateful that we're getting some help to our small businesses. But we as nonprofit leaders also know how crucial the nonprofit sector and industry is in Arkansas. It's a major employer of people, and it's a major purveyor of impact. So I wanted to, assemble this small panel today, and the chamber was very gracious to get this out not only to their members, but to make it available online for folks to kind of get some questions answered about the CARES Act, what's involved with that. The buzzword right now is Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, but we'll also talk a little bit about economic injury disaster loans, other resources for small businesses and nonprofits that are coming down from the SBA and other parts of the federal government. So I'm very excited to explore that today. My hope is that our time together will be conversational. So I'll introduce our panelists here in a moment. We're going to have a couple of conversations and break it up with questions. So you're more than welcome to submit your questions in the chat. Callie will be watching that and moderating those questions, and then getting those out so we can get them answered. Like James said, this session is being recorded so we can refer to it later. And there are also some resources that I kind of want to lead off with and point you to. I set up a resource page on my website that you can find at www.justinbuck.com. And right there on the front page, you can click through to some resources, point you in the right direction, or even sign up for a free 1-hour consultation to talk about your specific situation, and I'll give you advice. I also want to lead off with the fact that I am not an attorney or an accountant, so this is not legal, tax, or accounting advice. I just thought it was important for us to have these conversations as nonprofit leaders and kind of get our minds together around what resources are out there for nonprofits to continue producing effective programming. So our panelists that are joining us today, we're going to be joined by Sarah Kinzer from the Arkansas Community Foundation's, their Chief Program Officer, and Jeff Salser from the Small Business Administration. So very grateful that they've joined us. I'm going to kind of lead that off and dive into our conversation with Sarah about small grants, mini grants, and what foundations are doing in this time to help support nonprofits. So as we talk about that, I know that the Arkansas Community Foundation itself has a grant program, a mini grant program right now that's kind of exploded. So if I can open the floor for you, Sarah, to kind of talk a little bit about that mini grant program, what you guys are looking to fund specifically with that program, and how people can apply for that, or what people should be looking out for.
Yeah, you bet. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I'm glad to see some familiar names on the line. So I know some of you are familiar with the Community Foundation, but for those who may not be, we are a statewide foundation. We award grants in all 75 counties of the state, but work most closely in about 28 communities around Arkansas where we have local affiliate offices. Also, we have an office here in Little Rock, and so most of our staff is based here. So during this time, as always, our role is to help connect people who are charitably inclined to organizations and individuals out there doing work that needs their support. And so we work with a number of individual donors who have established charitable funds at the Community Foundation to support causes they care about. And also during this time, we have activated a statewide COVID response fund that individuals and a couple of other foundations and corporations have been contributing to, so that people can pool their dollars together in a place where we can get it out to nonprofits around the state. So as this crisis began to unfold several weeks ago, we sent a survey out to the nonprofits on our email distribution list, just asking for their feedback about the kinds of needs they were seeing and how it was affecting their organizations internally, as well as how it was affecting the clients that they served. One of the main things we heard was that many organizations were addressing food security and financial needs of individuals who are displaced from their jobs. Others were concerned about how they would transition their business to social distancing and how they would be able to continue serving clients under new safety regulations and guidelines. And others voiced that there was a loss of revenue, either because they were unable to see clients that they were billing for and receiving a fee for service, or they were having to cancel other revenue generating events. And so the result was that many organizations that are providing critical services to vulnerable populations are in need of support. So while we know that this crisis is going to be unfolding and will probably occur in multiple phases, we wanted to go ahead and start getting some resources out the door as quickly as possible. So we created this rapid response mini grant opportunity to respond to those needs. I will tell you that we have already gone through one round of accepting applications and having to close the portal because we had received way more applications than we could fund. We have gotten some more pledges in and so have been able to reopen that portal, but we're trying to pulse those mini grant opportunities so that we're not ultimately receiving way more applications than we have the opportunity to fund, because we certainly don't want to waste folks' time completing applications that are unlikely to get funded. And so right now the portal is open, and so if you're thinking about applying for a mini grant, I would encourage you to go ahead and do that quickly, as we are kind of day by day monitoring to see how much longer do we need to leave that open, how many more rounds are we likely to do. So that's available at arcf.org/COVID-19. There you'll see an opportunity for folks who want to give to the fund, as well as a link to more information about how to apply for grants. So right now in the mini grant phase, we're looking to serve some immediate needs, but we also intend on, as this kind of process unfolds, hopefully trying a few other grant strategies, sort of once we all collectively in our communities begin to adapt to a new normal. So the mini grant opportunity is what's on the table right now, but we plan on probably having a couple of more phases of grant making that are still evolving as we're assessing what shape the need is taking now and in the future. So with our mini grants, again, the goal is to get resources out there as quickly as possible, and our emphasis is on immediate and urgent needs. These are being reviewed on a rolling basis, and we certainly won't be able to fund all that we receive, but we do hope to get as many out there as possible. Priority is going to organizations that are sort of working on the front lines to serve vulnerable populations and respond to increasing demand from clients. So we're seeing a lot of requests for support for food and financial assistance for clients, for sanitizing materials, for transitions to telehealth, and accommodations for remote working and social distancing. So lots of that kind of thing is coming in right now. We're particularly interested. Oh, go ahead, Justin. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I've seen the application itself. It's very straightforward. It's very easy, and I'm grateful for that. And in fact, I've got to plug the Arkansas Community Foundation. My entree into nonprofit work was as a youth volunteer with the Arkansas Community Foundation in Garland County on a youth advisory council. So I can't stress enough how great the Community Foundation is to work with, and also how straightforward, I hesitate to use the word simple, but how straightforward this grant application is. There's a portion that asks about how are you responding, or how are your programs changing in response to COVID-19. There's some questions about your general programming itself. And then there's, some other opportunities for you to highlight what your program is doing in a really effective way. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe some tips as you're applying for that grant, or maybe how nonprofits could be writing to stand out?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the current phase, I think the main thing that we're looking for is folks that are providing those human services and emergency assistance needs. So things like food, shelter, transportation, living expenses, rent and utility assistance. We've heard the good news that Entergy is suspending some utility shutoffs, but nevertheless, we know those kinds of needs will continue to emerge. Folks serving vulnerable populations. So we're looking for, how are we supporting children and families without childcare? How are we supporting people who've lost a source of income? People who are at high risk medically, and other vulnerable populations. And so that's the primary thing that we're looking for with these. Also looking for just nonprofits that are saying, listen, we're trying to serve folks as usual and we're not able to because the demand is greater. We need more help to do that. So those kinds of proposals are of interest as well. I would say in all things, when you're writing proposals, it's really helpful to assume that your reader isn't really familiar with what you do and how you do your business. And so kind of spelling out, these are the kinds of services we offer. This is how we do it. This is how we typically fund our operations. And this is the kind of need that we're experiencing now and why we have a gap that a mini grant would help us with. And just kind of assume that the person who's receiving it doesn't already know all of those things. Some of the times when when I hear most from reviewers, like, I wasn't sure what was going on with that proposal, it's often because I think the grant writer is assuming that we know more about what they do than we actually do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this grant cycle or these, I like the word that you use, these pulses of support that are coming out from the Community Foundation, these are in addition to your regular grant making. So can you tell us just a little bit about how nonprofits can access those funds? And like, you guys have Giving Tree grants at your local affiliates. You have some specialized grant funds. Can you talk to us a little bit about those funding opportunities, maybe when those are coming and how nonprofits can take advantage of those?
Yeah, you bet. So the most consistent and regular way that we award grants around the state is through the Giving Tree program. Giving Tree is a geographically based program. So each of those 28 affiliates around the state that I mentioned has a local pool of funding that they use to award grants within their geography. So for those of you who only serve in Pulaski County, those aren't necessarily applicable because they specifically refer to counties outside of Pulaski County. Those of you who are statewide or regional organizations may have some experience with our affiliates. If you visit our website, there's a page dedicated to information about the Giving Tree program. These are small grants. They're, typically $5,000 or less. It's a pretty simple application process. All of our affiliates will offer a Giving Tree grant cycle once a year. Some do twice a year. So the next one coming up is July to August, and we have been encouraging our affiliates who will be participating in that cycle to think about what COVID response might look like and how they might support that in their community at that time. Most of the funds at the Community Foundation, though, aren't directed through those competitive grant cycles, but are directed by individual donors who have come and set up a fund. Perhaps it's a family fund because they want to teach their kids about giving, or perhaps it's a fund for their business because they want to do their corporate giving through the Community Foundation. So those donors kind of already have a sense of the sorts of projects that they want to recommend support from the fund that they've created. And so in those cases, what we try to do is keep an eye out for matchmaking opportunities. So if we know a donor has a particular interest in a certain charitable cause, and we hear of a project out in the community that's a fit for that, then we try to do some matchmaking. And then from time to time, we'll have other grant cycles like this COVID grant cycle that will come up based on a need or based on a funding source in the community. And so the best way to get information about that is through our website and also by subscribing to our Grant Opportunities e-newsletter for nonprofit organizations. Anytime we have an open call for proposals, we're going to share it in those places. So right now, Giving Tree is not open, but the COVID opportunity is. And as we figure out what the next phase of grant making beyond mini grants is going to look like, we'll be sharing that through our social media, e-news, and website as well.
So you're talking about the majority of your funds are those what are called donor advised funds?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm reading or hearing a little bit about almost all of those donor advised funds are in the market, and some of them are not performing exceptionally well right now. So are there any conversations in the philanthropy community about what the impact of the stock market performance might be on their giving, and what nonprofits might be looking out for or kind of just aware of as they're looking for those donor advised fund matchmaking opportunities?
Yeah, so well, all of our funds at the Community Foundation, for the most part, are invested as a pool, and our investment pool is subject to the market, just like everyone's 401k and every other invested pool
Yeah.
out there. And so we're experiencing the same ups and downs that others are, but I can tell you we're absolutely invested for the long term, and our strategy is to think about the long term future. And so, we're going to be on this roller coaster along with every other invested asset right now. But I work with investment advisors who help us craft a portfolio that's going to help us weather the storm. So right now, donor advised funds are continuing to give. And I can tell you that in addition to these COVID grants that are coming from this pooled fund, many of our individual donor advised funds are also making lots of grants to the organizations that they care about and support. So we're pushing ahead with grant making.
That's great to hear. And, I heard some encouraging words the other day about someone who had a donor advised fund, and they said, I actually, kind of like you said, Sarah, I've stepped up some of my giving, knowing that some of my partner organizations, some of my favorite nonprofits are really struggling right now, or are really feeling some anxiety, or as you mentioned, their program revenue is down. So I've actually stepped up some of my giving. And that has proven in previous economic downturns to be very successful as far as program outcomes. I said the other day that, hey, foundations, donor advised funds, please continue to give at least at the level that you're giving now to support these nonprofits, because as the market recovers, a lot of those funds will regenerate. But if we see these nonprofits who are not able to bridge the gap, they may not be able to regenerate. And so, I'm glad to hear that the sense in the philanthropic community is that we need to continue our support, if not increase our support, in a time of economic downturn. We're going to open it up here in just a minute for questions, but I want to kind of finish with maybe some thoughts on grant seeking in general. I know that you've been involved in the foundation world for quite a while. I've been a grant seeker and a grant writer for quite a while. I uploaded a video training with just some quick tips on small grants and mini grants and how to write successfully. You can find that on my website front page as well. But I wonder if you, from the foundation side, give us some tips and tricks on where to look for these small and mini grant opportunities and how to successfully write them.
Yeah. Well, I want to make everybody aware of a couple of grant opportunities that I know of that are open right now. So the Delta Dental Foundation of Arkansas has announced a grant opportunity, so I would encourage you to check that one out. I believe that one is still open. And then there are a number of United Ways around the state that have been actively raising funds and allocating dollars for COVID relief. So I would encourage you, depending on your service area, to check out Heart of Arkansas United Way, Central Arkansas United Way, and Northwest Arkansas United Way. And there may be some others that are responding in other ways as well. But those three, I believe, are planning to do some grant making around this activity. So do check those out. I would say, during COVID relief in particular, folks are going to be looking to get the word out fast and far, because I think the general sense is that we really want to get the dollars out far and wide. And so a great way to make sure you're up on that is to follow the funders that serve the kind of work you do on social media, on their e-newsletter, to make sure that you get immediate notice when those opportunities go out. I would say, just another good resource for you is to check out Volunteer AR's list of COVID resources. They've got some good links. Volunteer AR is a project of the DHS office that's involved with nonprofits and community support. They've changed their name and I can't remember what the name is, but that great list of resources on that page. And so in terms of grant seeking, I would say go ahead and have a list of your COVID related needs pre-identified. Talk with your board, talk with your staff, so that as opportunities arise, you can say, okay, this is the approximate size of the grants that this funder is looking for. Here's a need that I have that would be a good fit for that. I'd say go ahead and gather up all of your important documents so that you are ready to upload them and submit a grant proposal quickly. So make sure you can lay hands on your tax ID number, your IRS letter of determination, a list of your board of directors. If you're required to have an audit, get a copy of your audit report handy, get a copy of your Form 990 handy. All of those resources are commonly requested by funders when you're submitting a grant proposal. And so if you have a folder where you've got them all ready to go, that's going to save you time getting your proposal out the door. And then I would say just make sure that what you are doing is a fit for what the funder is particularly looking for. Every funder has slightly different interests and a slightly different niche, and you can save yourself a lot of time by making sure that what you're asking for is going to be a fit for what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great tips, especially thinking about, as you mentioned, just gather all those documents, go ahead and scan them in, put them in a folder on your desktop that says grant documents. And I would encourage you to do that when you're thinking about how to report on these grants too. So, thankfully, the level of reporting kind of scales up as you go to bigger and bigger grants. But if you streamline your processes by having documents that are requested frequently ready to go, then you can respond really quickly to these grant opportunities that come up. And like Sarah said, being intentional about chunking those expenses and saying, okay, here are some expenses that we could pay for $1,000 to $5,000 at a time. That's a great tip, because then you're ready with it and you don't have to invent something or try to create some new program on the fly that you're going to do to chase your funding. And finally, thinking about that good fit and the time that you're going to spend on these grants, whether you're thinking about hiring a grant consultant or a grant writer, or you have somebody with those skills on your staff, don't chase grants that don't fit perfectly with what you're doing, or don't at least fit into what you're doing, because you're wasting time, which is wasting salary or paid time that you're putting into that effort. So great tips from Sarah. I wanted to add just a quick follow-up question, because I get this all the time, and I wondered from a funder's perspective, Sarah, you mentioned if you're required to have an audit. A lot of organizations at a budget level under $500,000 don't typically have annual audits or even biannual audits. So in those cases, if a foundation or some other funder is asking for an audit, but you're an organization who doesn't typically perform at least annual audits, are there some other documents that maybe they could provide? Should they be talking to that funder about what they could offer in place?
Yeah, I would absolutely talk to your funder. If it's a foundation like the one that I work at, the person you want to speak to is probably has a title of program officer, and those are the folks whose job it is to answer questions from grant seekers. So don't feel worried about reaching out to a program officer. Or if it's a smaller foundation that maybe doesn't have staff, then they'll usually have some kind of contact information, and so you can just reach out and say, hey, this doesn't fit our circumstance. Is there an alternative? Some foundations really have a niche of funding organizations of a certain size, a certain tenure. There's something specific that they're looking for, but others may be willing to be flexible depending on the circumstances that fit your organization. So I think it's always appropriate to reach out and say, hey, before I put in a proposal, this is the situation. Is this acceptable, or is there a workaround?
Yeah. Mentioning that program officer is key. Relationships with program officers can be a huge difference for your organization. Never be afraid, just pick up the phone and call an office and say, I'm interested in chatting with a program officer that deals with this area of where we're working. I want to open it up to some questions. Callie has been putting these questions together for us. So Callie, do you have some questions we can answer for our viewers?
Sure. So the first one that I have is from, so it is SBA guarantees loans for the CARES Act are open to all business types and administered through the approval of eligible lenders. Are there any true grant funds and sources identified specifically? Hold on, let me reread this again. SBA guarantee loans for the CARES Act are open to all business types and administered through approved eligible lenders based upon borrower's credit scores and under certain criteria. These loans can be forgiven or converted to a 10-year repayment options. Are there any true grant funds and sources identified specifically for 501c3 organizations? So I think that's probably what Sarah just covered.
Yeah, so we're going to spend a little time here in a few minutes on the payroll protection or the Paycheck Protection Program and on the economic injury disaster loan. I'll give you the short answer is those programs nonprofits are eligible for, and we'll cover that in a little more detail here in a minute, including a part of the economic injury disaster loan that is sometimes referred to as a grant. So we'll cover that in a little more detail here in a bit. And if we don't answer all your questions, you can resubmit a more specific question. Callie will pick it up at that time.
Okay. And the other one is, if you're not addressing immediate human needs, but cultural needs instead, will there be funds available at some point for those?
Yeah, I saw that question come across on the chat, and my heart is really heavy about all of our arts and cultural organizations during this time, because I know that you all are losing funding because your events aren't able to go on as usual. Donors may be feeling the pinch and be a little less likely to give right now. And so, it's not just the food pantries, it's all of us who are struggling during this time. I would say for the very short term, most of the focus is going, at least for our grants, is going to be on human services and immediate needs. We aren't sure what the next phases are going to look like for the community foundation, but certainly throughout our history, we have funded a broad variety of charitable causes, arts organizations and cultural organizations included. So we certainly will be doing more grant making to support those organizations. I'm not sure what that will look like specifically within the context of COVID grants. So we're still working on it, but absolutely hearing that need. I would say other organizations that are traditional arts funders are absolutely going to be looking for how they can fill in that gap for arts organizations. So, subscribe to Philanthropy News Digest and some of the, there are several other, like Foundation Center, I guess is who has that product. GuideStar/Candid has lots of information about who funds what. And so those two sources are a good way to find out who is interested specifically in arts and cultural organizations. And I think those funders are going to know that they need to be stepping forward in this time. I think lots of individual donors and donor advised funds that have an interest in the arts and culture will continue to step forward as well. So I don't have a specific source to recommend to you, but we definitely hear you in voicing that need.
And I'll say, from that perspective, there have been a lot of questions and anxiety around how do we continue fundraising at this time? Is it appropriate for us to be asking our donors to give to the cause? My short answer on that is it absolutely is appropriate to continue fundraising and even to message this time of need to some of your donors. I wouldn't recommend like a scattershot approach on that. I would take a look at who are our really invested donors. So who are donors who have been giving to us at any amount for quite a long time? Who are our donors who give at quite a high level? And who are our, like, for instance, if you're a theater program and you have season pass holders, it's a good time to communicate to them about, just very transparently and saying that our traditional model provides for funding in these ways. And some of that's been interrupted. So it's a time that we could really use your support. Some of those are going to be individual phone calls and just very traditional development and relationship development work. Some of that could be a targeted email campaign to some of those folks. And then you could even run a Facebook campaign with your best advocates and set it for a period of time to kind of get the word out about your immediate need. People are very aware that nonprofits, and particularly, I think, arts and culture nonprofits, are in a delicate place. So I don't think it's inappropriate to ask for funding. With anything that you do, if you took puppies to a cancer ward to brighten up some of the folks that you would have people say, oh, what about the kids who are allergic to dogs? You're always going to have somebody who says, I can't believe you're fundraising at a time like this. If you're serious about continuing to operate the way you've been operating, or being able to open up as soon as possible and present and produce your programming, you need to be communicating with your donors and funding partners to tell them how you're dealing with this, and also to check up on them and how they want to continue to engage with your organization.
Okay. And there's no more questions on that topic.
Okay, great. Well, so we talked there a little bit about our grants, and I would very highly encourage you to seek out the Arkansas Community Foundation, check out their website, get on their mailing list, get as much information from them as you can. And then when things calm down a little bit, to even explore things. You know, I have nonprofits ask me all the time about establishing endowment funds, establishing things of that nature, operating endowments or long-term endowments. They have great resources on that. And to Sarah's point about, you know, investing in a pool, their investment pool has a very high rate of success and return over the long haul. So I can't encourage you enough to reach out to them and learn more about their programs for nonprofits, funders, and to access funding as well. So thank you for that, Sarah. We're going to dive next into get at the heart of that question that was asked earlier with these loan programs and possibility of grant funds being involved in that. So for that conversation, Jeff Salser from the Small Business Administration and I are going to chat a little bit. We're going to start on the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP. And I'll start that conversation by encouraging you. There have been a lot of questions about whether nonprofits or whether faith-based organizations or whether specific types of nonprofits are eligible for these funds. I want to encourage you that you absolutely are eligible to apply for these funds. The mechanism for applying for those funds is, again, fairly straightforward. They've streamlined a lot of those processes, and your major point of contact for the PPP is going to be your bank. So if you already have a good relationship with a banking institution, find out if they're an SBA lender, and then talk with them about how to contact or how to start that process with a loan officer so that you can get it in. I'm going to offer you just a very basic overview and then ask Jeff a few questions that might clarify things for your funders. We've got some Zoom working from home dogs chiming in there, so thanks for your patience with that. So the payroll protection or the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, is going to be a powerful tool for nonprofits who are worried about continuing to employ their folks at this time. It is an amazing opportunity because when you're looking at grant funding, a lot of grant funding typically is restricted funds for specific program activities or specific program outcomes that they want to see that you're pouring these funds into. The PPP focuses on keeping your folks employed. So it's a unique opportunity to apply for that. And of course, there's been a lot of excitement around, okay, at the end of that loan, you know, there's a great portion of it that's forgivable. As a matter of fact, you could structure your strategy with applying for this funding to where it's 100% forgivable. What you're going to want to keep in mind as you're looking at the PPP for your nonprofit is, first of all, the formula for that forgiveness piece is 75% of the funds that you're applying for need to be spent on payroll expenses. So that's your payroll, what you're paying your folks. That's medical benefits, that's other qualified benefits that fit under that. So all of that can be covered in that 75% section. I want to call out really quickly that something that's not necessarily included in those forgivable amounts are the payroll taxes that you owe for those employees. So employee side payroll taxes still have to be withheld and remitted, and employer side payroll taxes still have to be remitted as well. There is a piece in the law, and I want to point you to a resource that was put out. The Small Business Economic Council put out a section by section breakdown of the law. So we're going to include that link in a follow-up to you so that you can click straight through. And if you want to look at the section by section breakdown of that law, the Small Business Economic Council has done a great job of breaking it down section by section. But there is a specific section in the CARES Act that, first of all, allows for a delay of your payment of employer payroll taxes. So the employer side Social Security taxes that you normally pay on your 941s or your other IRS documents on a typically quarterly basis, you can defer those payments and pay them 50% by December 31, 2021, and the remainder by December 31, 2022. I want to caution you that if you're going to look at applying for that deferment or securing that deferment, you still have to pay those payroll taxes. So don't let it be a situation where you defer those employer side, that 6.2% Social Security tax, and then it comes next year and you're like, oh my gosh, we didn't do this. And I'll give you a very quick word of caution. I took over my first role as executive director at a small, medium-sized nonprofit. My predecessor had not paid payroll taxes for several quarters. And so then not only are we stuck with having to pay the payroll taxes, we're hit with fines and a bunch of other extra expense that made it really difficult for us to continue programming and fundraise for that kind of expense. So if you're going to seek a deferment of employer side payroll taxes, make sure that you're being smart about getting those paid on time. I would point you to some resources. The SBA's overview guide gives you some more information about that, and that section by section breakdown of the law gives you some more information about that specific piece as well. But those payroll taxes are not a benefit or another payroll expense that necessarily qualifies under that. The other 25% of that loan can be for approved expenses like utilities. It can be for rent. It can be for interest on mortgage, not principal on mortgage, but interest on mortgage paid through the 8-week period of performance. So you actually have an opportunity to cover quite a lot of your overhead that frankly is typically not covered by grants or other program-focused funding mechanisms. So I really would encourage you to check that out, see if it's the right option for you. Have some conversation. If you're an executive director, you need to be having some conversations with your board president about how this is all operating. There's a section on the PPP app that asks for owner of the business, right? And that's been a very confusing piece for a lot of nonprofits because nobody owns a nonprofit. Typically, the folks that you're going to want to use in that section are going to be the typical signatories for your bank accounts or for your credit agreements or anything like that. My friends in the banking world call those the control proxy of your organization. That's a super technical term, but if you think about who has been authorized by your board to conduct your banking business, so almost any time you get a new executive director or CEO or someone with signing authority, your board has passed some kind of banking resolution that authorizes that person as a decision maker. And that's going to be that point of contact. I would encourage you to think about and to talk with your loan officer and your accountant about, should we include both the executive director / CEO and the board president? Is that the correct way to do this? Or can we just do that with a CEO / executive director? So definitely have some follow-up conversations with whoever's advising you on your accounting, whoever's advising you on your employment law, and your bank loan officer to get the details of that all worked out. Another piece of this PPP and the CARES Act in general is that there is an exclusion. Section 2206 of the law lists an exclusion for certain employer payments of student loans. That includes current tuition, fees, books, money. So if you're someone who offers that as a benefit to your employees, those payments for the rest of this year are not considered income for those employees. So when it comes time for them to claim that traditionally as income, they're excluded. Those payments made by an employer are excluded from that employee's income. So think about that if that's a benefit or a section of benefits that you do offer or are interested in offering to invest in your people to get them some further education and resources to develop your staff. So one other quick thing I want to point out, and then Jeff, I want to ask you a couple of questions and get the conversation there about the PPP and answer some questions for our viewers. There is particularly interesting to nonprofits, there's a section of the law that allows what's called a partial above the line deduction. So typically when you are accepting charitable donations from your donors, obviously those are tax deductible if you itemize. The thing is, recently, with tax law changes, you know, that threshold for the standard deduction is so high that a lot of your donors may not even be interested in getting a tax receipt. You should always send an acknowledgement. You should always send a tax receipt at some point in case they want it. But typically, folks aren't giving at a high enough level to be able to claim that. Well, this year, every American can deduct up to $300 of charitable deductions, even if they don't itemize. So for this year, you don't have to itemize to claim that deduction. So that's kind of an interesting point. If you're looking at some folks, or how you message to your donors, hey, this is a great time to give. Not only are you supporting us at a critical juncture in our existence, but you're also eligible for up to $300 of charitable deduction without having to itemize on your taxes. So that's kind of a call out that I wanted to mention as you're thinking about how to message to your donors during this time. So I want to bring on Jeff Salser from the Small Business Administration. Jeff, you know, this time has been super hectic for you guys as well as us, because as small, medium-sized, even large nonprofits are looking for resources to access this funding, you guys are processing these requests for information and the loan documents. So tell us a little bit about, if you're seeking the PPP or the EIDL, which we'll talk about here in a second, who is your main point of contact specifically for PPP if you're a nonprofit that's looking to apply? Oh, Jeff, I think we may have an audio problem there.
Is that any better?
There we go.
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you turn the mute button off.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things, you know, we're dealing with as you go through sort of an unprecedented disaster where there's never been all 50 states and territories, is you've got a law that's signed into law, or actually you have the debate, and then you get the law that's signed into law, and then there's a lag between when the administrative functions are all performed and the information goes down from Washington to the district levels. So, So trust me, I understand your frustration. I understand some of the frustration of the banks. We're all dealing with it. I know our district director, Edward Haddock, has been working like tirelessly around the clock to try and get as much clarification on things we can. So I just want to kind of throw that out there as a caveat. I also think I saw some of our resource partners are on here, and I can't thank them enough, because, you know, the work like the SBTDC is doing is phenomenal, and the volume is just over the top. So, you know, we're all in this together, and we're all kind of pulling through this together. So as you think about that, but we also want to get into the brass tacks as far as the PPP. So your first point of contact is going to be, once you determine whether or not you think that's the right option for you, is going to be one of the participating banks. We've got a list. That being said, not all of the banks, as of the last time I actually checked something, but it changes rapidly. I mean, between the time this call has taken place and I get off, I'll probably have about 60 missed calls. So the information is changing rapidly as we go through this. So I would highly recommend that you, if you're not signed up for updates with the SBA, go onto our website and sign up through the Arkansas District Office for updates. I'll make sure Callie gets a link for that, and that we can send that out. So as these different things change, I know we'll be sending out and have a link to all the participating lenders for the SBA in Arkansas that'll be listed on the website if it's not already. My guess is it's probably already there. So your primary point of contact is going to be the bank, and most of the banks, you know, you can probably imagine, are most likely going to be participating or already eligible to participate. We're just not quite sure as far as where they're at in that process. My best suggestion is call the bank you have a relationship with. That's usually solid advice, or just go to the list and pick one of the lenders off of there. And again, like you hit those points perfectly. Again, 75% of those proceeds has to be used for payroll, and the additional 25% needs to be utilized for rent, mortgage, interest payments, and utilities. But if you look at that, you know, with the opportunity to have 100% forgiven, obviously that's a no-brainer, and we want to get that money into the businesses and the nonprofits. As far as, did you want to talk about the EIDL at this point, or?
Let's save that for in just a minute. We'll kind of talk a little more in depth on the PPP, and then we'll go into the EIDL. So with those payroll expenses, we're going to answer some more questions here in a minute, but that includes retirement funds or 401k matches. Is that right?
I'd actually have to check the guidance on that before I commit
Okay.
to it. I mean, I'm happy to do that, and I'll email back.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of different folks, and I'm not going to scroll through the documentation now, but I'd rather just keep the flow going.
Yeah, sure. So great. So, in thinking about nonprofits, a lot of nonprofits have a faith-based component, or they may be entirely faith-based with their programming. Those programs, those faith-based programs, are still eligible, and in fact, the staff at those faith-based organizations can still be paid. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. The administrator put out additional guidance. I know that I shared a copy of that with you today.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is specifically for the PPP program in the CARES Act, it's written that regardless of whether or not it's faith-based, those things are there for them. Because if you look at the spirit of the law, what we want to do is have organizations keep their employees.
Mm-hmm.
We need the daycares open. We need their faith-based hospitals. We need these locations open, or if they're not able to stay open, we want them to be open shortly after the disaster. So, we want them to hang on their employees. I know I fielded dozens of calls from faith-based, either daycare centers or education centers that weren't engaged primarily in religious education, but just, those faith-based organizations that provide the services for all of the community. So absolutely, there's additional guidance out there on that. Like I said, I shared it with you, Callie. I'll make sure that you're able to send this out to the group as well. But the administrator put out a press release on Saturday that goes through really all of it. And the bottom line is and I'll actually just read it to you. Just going straight from the administrator. Faith-based organizations have always provided critical social services for people in need, and the SBA will make clear that these organizations may have access to this emergency capital. So there's a high level of commitment from the SBA, the administrator, and the administration to make sure that we get this out to those organizations as well.
Absolutely. And critically, usually as a faith-based organization, you may be thinking about traditional grant funding or traditional, especially if you apply for any government grants, thinking about dividing your activities between what is religious in nature and what is secular in nature and what are our human services and what are we doing, and categorizing things. But the guidance that the administrator put out is that anyone on payroll can be covered in the PPP. Is that right?
I'd double check and reread it, but yeah, I mean, based on the discussion that we had today, those folks that are on staff are covered for that.
Yeah, I think we'll get the absolute clarification on that as well for everybody. But from what I'm reading as well, and again, I can't stress enough that this is not legal, tax, or accounting advice, but from what I'm reading, even up to ministers who may be on staff at faith-based organizations could be covered under PPP and continue to pay them and eligible for that forgiveness period as well. Correct. So as we're thinking then about the PPP, thinking through, as folks are of course making their own decisions on whether this is a right program or a fit for them, talk again maybe for just a little bit about that forgivable portion. So the period of performance for this loan is 8 weeks from the time of origination. So you take out the loan on this date, and 30 days after that, 8 weeks after that, you can apply for forgiveness of that loan. And as long as you've used those loans for approved funds in that ratio, you're eligible. But it's not like if you use 74% for payroll and 26% for other overhead, you don't lose all the forgiveness, right?
Right. What they're going to do is look at it and just apply those numbers, but then go back to the fact that it's a 2-year loan at a 1% interest rate. So, I mean, that on its face, even if there wasn't a forgiveness portion, if this is able to help you keep in business and keep your organization providing the services, that's still the best deal I've ever seen. Regardless of the percentage of forgiveness, it's still, a great opportunity to be able to keep your staff in play, and take care of them, and also, maintain that viability throughout this crisis, because this crisis is going to end, and we are going to need everybody to be back and doing what they're doing. More so than ever.
Yeah. So I know that nonprofits are typically very, very risk averse. They're very reluctant to take on debt. And that's a very smart way to think, to be careful and very, very thoughtful as you enter any kind of debt relationship and thinking about how that's going to carry forward in the future, because it is very hard to find funding that's unrestricted or that can be used for the servicing of debt. So I understand the reluctance typically to enter into debt relationships. But like Jeff said, if you use these funds for the approved purposes in the ratio that's prescribed, it's highly, highly likely that 100% of that loan is going to be forgiven at the end of your period of performance. Even if any portion of it is not forgiven, it's a 2-year loan with a 1% interest rate, which, to Jeff's point, is a fantastic deal for just about anybody. So, to be clear, not encouraging folks to apply for the max and then use it however you want, because you still have to use these funds for covered or approved purposes. But that, again, can be used to cover your payroll, to cover your office rent, to cover any interest on mortgage payments, utilities. So there's a broad range of approved uses for this funding, and almost no excuse for an organization not to apply for funds in such a way that they'll all be forgiven. So Jeff, do you have any other kind of final words or tips for folks before we get into our viewers' questions about how to approach this PPP process and maybe what to be thinking about?
The best advice that I can give is what I've been giving, Arkansas small businesses for the last couple of weeks is, hang on to as much cash as you can. I don't mean don't do your mission, but utilize all those options to make sure the more cash you have, it means the longer runway you have to get through this. And we're all going to get through this, and it's going to be sticky, but together we're going to get through this. So, if you've got the opportunity to defer some debt payments, why not take it, as long as it's not going to impact your organization or credit negatively? If you've got the opportunity to, really just kind of take avail of all the options available, so that you've got the best opportunity to have the most runway, so that when we get through with this, you'll be in a better position.
Absolutely. And to emphasize, these lending decisions are being made by your bank. So as you're preparing to apply for these funds, or you're preparing to apply for these loan programs, that's your main point of contact, and they're making the lending decisions. So being very clear with them up front about what the purpose of the loan funds, what purpose you're going to use the loan funds for, and then also being clear about what reporting mechanisms they have at the end of this process. So what documentation am I going to need to keep a close track of to apply for the forgiveness of this loan? Because that decision hinges in large part on that bank as well. So, keeping an open line of communication and good relationship with these banks. I know that it's hard to get in touch with them. And I know that right now there's a lot of change happening in those application procedures, but give them a little bit of grace, because, this information and this guidance has been rapidly changing. So thank you, Jeff, for those pointers on it. And you brought up a great point too about credit. If your organization has never taken out a loan before, it doesn't have any credit history, that may be a point of concern for you personally. But for the PPP program, the federal government has weighted the risk on these loans very, very low, right, Jeff? So that should, in your mind or estimation, that should help organizations even with no credit history to access the funds. Am I thinking correctly?
Right. Well, I mean, what we're looking at is the whole program is designed to make sure that you're able to keep your employees. So that's the spirit of the law. That's the letter of the law. That's why the forgiveness is associated with it. And the banks are given wide latitude to make decisions at the bank level. That being said, though, they're still waiting for additional information from headquarters as we are. And as that rolls out, we'll definitely share that with everybody. Once again, I highly suggest signing up for updates, because I know our district director is making sure that we're pushing them out at least once a day, sometimes with lots of news twice a day, because things are fluid. While we're not going to probably take away from the information we have today, there might be additional guidance and frequently asked questions that tomorrow will be a new day. Also, I know that the folks at the SBTDC have dealt with a ton of this and done some great training on the different programs as well. And I'm sure they'll share that the guidance has kind of trickled in over time, and we're rapidly getting a much better picture of this. And fairly soon, I think it'll become a much more robust option for all of us, and information will be a little clearer.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great information there. So Callie, let's open that up to some of our curated questions from our viewers, and we can answer those together. Oh, I think you're muted.
There we go. So the first question that we have is, can the PPP loan apply for new programming to help with the COVID crisis, to hire additional people, or is it just to keep existing staff?
The spirit of the law is for you to keep your existing staff. And when you talk about new programming, so if I understand how it's calculated, is what's your head count when you started, what's your payroll when you started, what's your head count and payroll when you ended. So really keep in mind that with these funds limited, I'd look at it as how can we maintain our current mission and do the things we can do creatively to help folks in this crisis versus hiring additional staff. But I do believe, my understanding is that they're looking at what's your head count when you start, what's your payroll when you start, and what is it when it ends, and making sure that there's not a decrease there. Now, you absolutely can rehire staff that you've recently laid off, though. That I can say for sure.
Yeah, and that's my understanding as well. Thank you for that, Jeff. So thinking from a nonprofit point of view about starting new programming, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Now, if you are pivoting some of your existing programming to serve the immediate needs of folks in response to COVID-19, that's fantastic. Please do that. Keep in mind that you should be doing that with existing staff. And like Jeff said, if you've laid some folks out, I mean, the metric for performance here, to use some grant language, is how many folks are you employing at the beginning of the period? How many folks are you employing at the end of the period? That's has to do with the forgiveness formula. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, from my understanding, the exact same people in those positions, as long as you're maintaining that payroll from beginning to end of the 8-week period. Am I thinking right there, Jeff?
I think you are. I think that's a solid way to kind of look at things.
Great. Also thinking about the folks that you're taking out, I want to mention that the PPP is for part-time, full-time, and other employees, but it does not include 1099 contractors. Your 1099 contractors are going to be eligible to apply for their own PPP loan, so they're not included in this program. But if you have some other non-traditional employment structure with an employee or something like that, or I would take those questions to your banker, I would err on the side of caution. But I don't think there's anything wrong with asking your banker those questions about, is this an eligible expense that we can handle here through this PPP program? Because it's just like asking for money. What's the worst thing you can hear is no, and I heard a great tip from somebody the other day that said, the worst thing that could happen is that you're eligible for this money, or you're eligible to keep your folks paid, and you don't access it. The second worst thing that can happen is they say, no, you're not eligible for the loan, or we're not going to approve the loan. So some great tips there. Callie, we have any other questions on this topic?
Yeah, does the 500 employee limit apply to PPP for nonprofits?
Short answer is, Go ahead.
I was going to say, but you're probably the best one to answer for this. So you go ahead and I'll follow up, Jeff.
I'm interpreting the same documentation you are probably. So the 500 the 500 employee limit is for those organizations that have employee size. But let's say, for example, you're a nonprofit and you actually have a revenue side of 28 million, then that would apply to the 500. However, some organizations, their size standard, if it's employee size, may be above 500. They've got some at 1,000. I believe there's a couple of types of organizations. So what you want to do is, if you go back to your tax return, look at the NAICS code you followed, and you'll be able to look up the size standard on that.
Because typically I'm seeing that there are some NAICS categories that are exempted from that 500, and typically I'm seeing them fall under food service and entertainment. But I also noticed that organizations with multiple locations can use a formula that says 500 employees per location. So in other words, if you are, for example, a mental health organization that has offices in Garland County and Benton County and, Dacia County, you could treat those separate offices as separate locations, and that's 500 employees per location. Am I thinking right there, Jeff?
I'd have to dig into that a little bit deeper on the size standards. I would be comfortable agreeing with that, but I definitely will. So employee locations, let me just put a note here, and then I'll follow up with you and Callie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So, I mean, again, we're interpreting documentation and we're interpreting rules and guidance that is in flux. But what I've been seeing is that that's a per location 500 hit. So I want to jump into economic injury disaster loans really, really quickly, Jeff, because I know that you may have to dip off here in just a minute. But can you give us the 30,000 foot view on the economic injury disaster loans and how you apply for those and where that comes from, how it differs from PPP?
Sure. So the EIDL, or economic injury disaster loans, you can apply for directly on the SBA's website. If you go to www.sba.gov, click on Learn More, and then click on Funding Options, it'll be right next to the PPP. With that, there's an advance of up to $10,000. But what most people that applied for didn't read to was the up portion. And also, up until about the middle of last week, we didn't know how they calculated that. My understanding is that's based on employee size, and it's $1,000 per employee up to 10 employees. So then you would max out. I also believe that the religious component the religious nonprofits cannot apply for that, but standard nonprofits can apply for that. One of the things, in order for those things to be forgiven on both of them, are they can't be used for the same thing. So you wouldn't utilize, let's say you got a small nonprofit with 3 employees, you apply for the EIDL, you wouldn't use that $3,000 to pay for payroll expenses, because those are being covered through the PPP. You can apply for both though, which is something that people want to, think one or can I do one, can I do the other? And my suggestion is apply for both. Just be, if you're managing a nonprofit, you're used to managing funds and tracking where things are going. So make sure that things are going in the right categories. Mm-hmm. The other thing, apply sooner than later. We've got all 50 states and all U.S. territories involved in, I think, 99.6 or 99.8% of businesses in Arkansas are small. That's so there's a ton of volume going in there. But absolutely apply for that. So the steps that'll happen is you'll go ahead, you'll apply, you'll click the advance. It's all online. It's pretty quick. And then they'll ask a couple other questions for nonprofits. You'll submit your bank account, your writing information, and then it'll go off into the queue. At some point, if you're approved, you'll get a direct deposit for the advance portion of that. Then after that, a few weeks later, most likely, you'll get a call from a loan officer where they'll start to put together the rest of that loan. Now, that loan is at 3.25% over 30 years. One of the things you'll notice on the loan application is nowhere do you request a dollar amount from the SBA of how much you want to borrow. What they're going to do is they're going to look at your income and your expenses and kind of calculate out based on how, the length of the disaster, is my understanding, how much they're going to loan the organization. But again, 3.25% on the 30-year loan, that's pretty cheap money.
Well, and the deal is sweeter for nonprofits, because I think the nonprofit rate is 2.75.
You're absolutely right. I'm on track to talk about businesses all the time, but
Yeah.
you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So the deal is, sweeter. Again, a lot of nonprofits are very reluctant to take loan money, but you're talking about that advance portion up to $10,000. To be very clear, that advance portion, first of all, you don't have to pay back, and second of all, that advance portion, well, I mean, you don't have to pay it back, and it's coming much more quickly than the loan funds themselves, and thirdly, that advance portion is separate. So you could receive that advance portion even if you're denied or do not take the loan. Is that correct?
Correct. So in theory, let's say that Jeff's nonprofit applied for the EIDL. I went ahead and got it, and then we kind of weathered through this and then realized, you know what? I don't really need the loan. I don't have to take the loan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you it's literally a checkbox on the application. You check that you'd like to be considered for that up to $10,000 advance, and then if you receive that and then don't take the loan, you still don't have to pay that advance portion back.
Right.
So
also, and I'll double check. I mean, there's always some fine print and some things. Obviously, you're going to want to make sure you fill out your applications properly and use proper information. And I can't stress enough. I mean, I've had so many questions about even on the nonprofits. I'm sure you do you have some folks on 1099s. 1099s aren't employees. So, however, any one of your 1099s can apply for the PPP, and they can also apply for the EIDL.
Mm-hmm. And I want to clarify that as we're talking about nonprofits, we're talking about private nonprofits that are authorized under Section 501c3, right? So there are a lot of and 501c9 and a couple of other designations, but there are a lot of different 501c organizations that are referred to generally as nonprofits. What we're reading in the guidance is that if your organization has a determination letter from the IRS, then as a 501c3, then you're eligible for both of these programs. Is that correct?
Correct. However, I believe I read that if it's a religious organization on the PPP and it's not received the determination from the IRS yet, it's still considered eligible. Didn't we have a discussion about that earlier this morning? Yes.
Yeah, we were talking about, so if you're, for example, a church that has an auxiliary program that maybe employs some folks in a food pantry program or something of that nature, you can apply for these funds, even if you don't have an IRS determination as 501c3, or if that determination is pending. So you can go ahead and apply. You're going to need an employer identification number, an EIN, or a TIN, a taxpayer identification number. But if you are paying staff, you already have one of those. So there are no extra steps that you have to go through to apply for this funding. Am I remembering that correctly, Jeff?
That's the same way I recall the conversation.
Excellent. So great. So I want to also mention that if you apply for the EIDL and you apply for that advance, so in this situation, if you're planning to apply for both PPP and EIDL, the forgivable portion of your PPP will be reduced by whatever amount you get as an advance. So I want to make sure that makes sense. So if you apply for both loan programs, right, the advance that you receive is going to come off that forgivable amount. So it sounds like, oh no, I'm going to have to pay that later. Well, remember, that's a cash payment that you're going to be receiving directly. And those PPP funds is a cash loan that you're going to be receiving directly. So you're not actually obligating yourself to extra payment. And Jeff, maybe you have some more words about that distinction or that particular piece.
At this point, my major concern is making sure Arkansas small businesses have enough cash on hand to survive. And some do and some don't. And the same thing with the nonprofits. So apply for both. You don't have to accept both. Apply for them. Get in the process. I mean, the systems are, I mean, they're overflowing with applications. So get in the process, and then, you know, if we need to go back and say, you know what, I've got a small nonprofit. We applied for the EIDL. I got $3,000 on the EIDL, and then I got the PPP. Just pay it back. I mean, the best bet is what you can't do is go 3 weeks from now and decide, you know what, gosh, I really wish I would have applied for this stuff 3 weeks ago because I need it now. So apply now, get in the process and in the system, and then, you know, let's get you in the system and in the queue, and then we can start to say, you know what, this isn't what I need today, or this really isn't something that we need, because we've blunted the curve and we're already back off to the races.
Right.
That's my best advice is you can't take back the days that you're waiting.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I want to cover this really quickly. I'm seeing a question about organizations over 500. So if you don't necessarily qualify for PPP, are there other SBA loan programs or other SBA funding mechanisms that you might apply for, or does SBA deal specifically with organizations under 500 employees?
So SBA deals with organizations that deem small. And then we're basically looking at your NAICS code. So as a manufacturer, you could be small at 500, you could be small at 1,000. Commercial construction, the size standard is $36.5 million. So it really is based on the organization and the NAICS code. And I'm happy to work with anybody as far as figuring that out. And there's a lot of folks that can do that as well. But yeah, the loan programs are designed for the small businesses for the most part. And I mean, you know, our 504 for capital, you know, equipment and expansion and building, or, you know, our flagship 7A program. We've even got microloan programs for loans down to $500. So it really is geared for the small businesses, but don't get stuck at 500, because I've heard that number thrown around a lot. But these programs are looking at 500. But what the government considers small and what you do are two different things. So most of the service sector industries are going to be based on revenue, and then on manufacturing, it's usually based on number of employees. But that can go down as low as 250. It can go as high as, I believe, 1,500. You need to look for the individual industry.
That's a great pointer. So if you're looking at those specific mechanisms or funding tools that you could use, we should probably give the SBA just a little bit of time, and then maybe get in touch with our local SBA office to ask more questions about those.
Sure. You can email me today at jeffrey.sulzer@sba.gov. Let me type that in there. I can promise you it might take me a little bit of time to get back to you, like a couple of days, but I'm happy to track down what I can for you. And if I don't know, I'll be happy to tell you I don't know.
That's great.
And then we've got a ton of resource partners. So just shoot me an email if you've got questions, and I'll be happy to get you in contact with who we can.
That's awesome. Yeah, and typically I want to point out that the ASBTDC works a lot with small business and does huge services for them. Sometimes they're a little restricted on what one-to-one consulting or one-to-one coaching they can do with nonprofits specifically. Yep. So I've kind of been responding to that by offering a free hour of consultation with any nonprofit or nonprofit leader. You can find that information on my website, which is justinbuck.com, or you can just send me an email and I'll be happy to schedule a 1-hour consultation for you free of charge. So kind of responding to that, the ASBTDC, I can't say enough about what a great resource they are. They offer training programs and all kinds of resources that nonprofits can hop in on and learn from, but sometimes they're a little restricted on what they can do as far as one-to-one consulting and counseling. So great, we're kind of coming to the end of our conversation here. I kind of want to recap and then offer Callie the opportunity to jump in with any last minute questions or other things that come through for us. So I want to recap this time together by saying that we as nonprofits understand how crucial the services we provide are, and we as nonprofits know what a delicate time this can be with our traditional funding models maybe experiencing some contraction. But there are tools out there to help you weather the storm. The SBA's programs are fantastic places to start. The mini grant opportunities and the emergency grant opportunities that are out there are another great place to be. And I want to remind you not to neglect your normal funders, not to neglect your normal foundations and partners in this time as you're looking for some bridge the gap funding, because some of these grant cycles are coming up and we're going to need to be prepared to write them. Some of these funding cycles are coming up. We're going to need to be prepared to respond to them. So don't neglect those opportunities that you have been using to fund your work so far while you're looking for some emergency gap funding here. As Jeff said, the biggest regret for a lot of folks may be that they did not apply for the funds, and then they find out later that they very desperately need some help. So I would encourage you to consult your accountant, consult your employment attorney, and consult your board president, your CEO, or your other board members on, is this the right decision for us? Is this the right time? And how can we mitigate some of the risk as a nonprofit? And finally, I want to encourage all of you, please continue to communicate with your donors. There have been some great webinars and trainings on how to communicate in times of crisis. I would encourage you to check those out. You can find a lot of them on Facebook. You can Google a lot of resources. The Chamber itself is doing another training session coming up and has had one in the past on this. But to put it very simply, your donors and your supporters want to hear from you. They want to hear what good news there is. So how are we continuing to serve people through adversity? And they want the opportunity to engage with you in some way. You know, it's a great time for folks to learn more about your mission and to get engaged as a donor, or to get engaged if you can find some opportunity for folks to volunteer virtually or with respect to social distancing. So those are some tips and tricks. I want to open it up for a final round of any questions that came in we haven't quite answered yet.
Justin, it looks like we're good here. This is James, so I'll just close this out if we can. If you all will join me in thanking Justin, Sarah, and Jeff for their thought leadership on this. I also want to thank, from my team, Kelly Turner and Buckley O'Malley. You can see the information for Justin, Sarah, and Jeff on the screen. As mentioned earlier, we will be sending a follow-up email with all this contact information, answers to some of those questions, and links to some important resources. If you haven't been to the Chamber's COVID-19 page, it's littlerockchamber.com/COVID-19. We've got many of these links that you heard referred to today, a lot of the guidance from the federal government. We update that several times a day. We've also got resources on there for local restaurants and small businesses that are selling gift cards, as well as links to webinars now. So we did a webinar with the Small Business Administration on the loan program 2 weeks ago. We had a webinar with Congressman French Hill last week on the CARES program. And later this week, there will be a SCORE webinar. There will be a webinar with the Arkansas Bankers Association that will focus on some of the bank regulations. So as you think about this payroll protection and you think about what the banks are going to be looking for, the Arkansas Bankers Association has taken the lead, and they will be presenting what many of the banks will be looking for as you go to apply for that. So look for that probably Wednesday or Thursday of this week. We'll be sending out information on that. And then Friday, we've actually got another equip on dealing with stress. So as you think about sort of thinking about all of what we do in this new reality, we're trying to support as much as possible. So the last thing I'll say, and this is you know, a little bit out of context here as we sit in early April, but many of you are familiar with a program that the Chamber's done called Serve the Rock, which every year is sort of our profile of nonprofits. For many years, we've been thinking about how we can make that more impactful. And so this fall, we have moved Serve the Rock off of its March date to the fall. And this year, in addition to the showcase of nonprofits, we're going to be working to arrange for Friday and Saturday day of service. So as nonprofits, as you're thinking about how to come out of this, how to engage your volunteers, how to get new donors, how to demonstrate your mission, and how to celebrate our community, we will be reaching out and would encourage you to participate in that. We'll be highlighting nonprofits and be pushing volunteers and donors your way. And the goal is to have 2 days of service in Little Rock, where on Friday and Saturday we can really celebrate the missions that each of you are doing. And so keep an eye out for that. We hope that it will be well timed for a period when we return to some semblance of normalcy and can put nonprofits front and center for the community and help celebrate what you're doing. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Serve the Rock will be moving to this fall, and we'll be expanding to include 2 days of service on Friday and Saturday after Thursday night's kickoff. And Justin's been a part of that. Steve Bernanke, who I know is on this, has been leading that effort. So more to come on that, but we're here to serve you all as members, you all as nonprofits. We thank you for everything that you're doing for our community, for the betterment of our community, and hope that you found some value here in today's webinar. Again, go to the website and look for the follow-up email. With that, we'll conclude for the day. Thank you again, and thanks to Stephen and Arkansas BlueCross BlueShield for helping to support today's Equip series. Have a great day, everyone.